Right. Well, we will officially begin. My name is Jackie Jones. To everyone that is joining us, we have about 5 people here in Zoom with us. We have about 7 people on Facebook right now, and I know that will fluctuate. I am the owner of One Degree Marketing, but I am also the community engagement manager for Create Birmingham, which is why I'm coming to you today. And what we do during these community conversations is normally just talk about things that our communities are facing. Oftentimes, back BC before Corona, we would do this in person, usually in a community, maybe in a library, and kind of talk to someone there in that community. Well, all of our communities have kind of melted into the internet. So we are here together, and we are especially wanting to talk to, just kind of get some things off of our minds about if you are in business or if you're doing anything that requires any type of support, especially professional support, creatives who need professional support and knowledge. So that's why we're here today. I have with me a wonderful, wonderful person whom I think is awesome for many reasons. I will allow Mr. Josh Andrews to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Josh Andrews. I'm the managing founding partner of Gatehouse Law. We're a boutique law firm who focuses on working with small businesses from a comprehensive standpoint. We focus on an education-first approach to our legal advice and service. Our goal is to help small business owners understand the legal that impacts their business every day. And now, kind of more than ever, that's become really an important part of what we do.
I can imagine. Luckily for me as a business owner, a lot has not really changed in my process. But let me tell you, I can imagine. So let me just say this before I ask my first question. For those who are watching, if you have questions at any time, if you're here in the Zoom with us, you can absolutely drop your questions using the Q&A function or in the chat box, whichever you feel most comfortable with. If you are on Facebook, feel free to drop your questions, comments in the chat there. It's a little bit more delayed, of course, in our real time, but we're keeping an eye out. We see you. So I'm going to start this off because that's kind of my job. But I do have a question, for those people who are in business or they've been providing a service or product. Let's just kind of start with the beginning, and they're having some new ideas. They're offering some new things because of the adjustments. Maybe it's because of what the governor says, maybe it's not. What are the first things that we should be considering legally when we start to change what we offer?
That's a good question. So the kind of legal considerations for changing your offerings is about the same as when you get started. From a business standpoint, when you started your business, if you've run a business for a long time, you had to think about a lot of things. Legal was part of it. That you had to consider. It's not that different when you make a new offering or a changed offering. Right now, if it's based on what the governor said, what the mayor of Birmingham has said, what the health department that you happen to be listening to has said, we have to consider the local impact of what happens. And so from a legal standpoint, the consideration that you were always making and trying to figure out is what is the most impact to what you do. And we start at the local standpoint, right? So if you're operating in the city of Birmingham, Birmingham has some, there's some statements that Birmingham has made about what needs to be done and how employers are supposed to act and how you're supposed to treat your customers. This is, of course, right now, but it works from a broader stance. Then you also have to look to the county and the state, and then of course the federal government. In some instances you have to pay attention to whether or not they conflict. If you start from the local and go all the way up to the federal, the kind of important thing is that you have to follow the strictest of the guidelines, and that's kind of what you're going to. As long as you're following those most strict guidelines, you're going to be safe because you are in compliance with the more relaxed guidelines that may potentially exist. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that as a business owner, you do have the ability to be even more strict than potentially you're required to be. Obviously, at that point, you've got to deal with discrimination issues and stuff like that. But right now, as discrimination is basically defined as if it applies the same to everyone, then then there's no discrimination that may be coming. So if, you've got rules about how many people can come together, it may be that you stay at that 10-person level and you're not okay just, opening it up broadly, right? And so you may want to be more strict than you were necessarily required to be. The key in anything that you're dealing with, especially when you're trying to stay focused, especially in an instance like this, when there's a rapid change that may be temporary, is to make sure that you provide plenty of notice and that you communicate as you work through it, because the most protections that we as business owners have right now is in protecting what we've done and how we've taken steps to follow the rules. And that's going to be the things that do protect us.
And so you said something that caught my attention there about giving plenty of notice. Like, how can you do that when things are changing literally week to week? Like, is it worth the time to like seek legal counsel to figure out, an adjustment? And then, or at least when we think about what's happened in the last 2 months, even, it's been sometimes week to week or bi-weekly where we're seeing kind of major changes and restrictions. So is it worth it to go all the way to the point of doing things like changing contracts or changing, like going in and making, especially if you have a business where people have to sign anything, is it worth it to go ahead and make that change based on what you're learning? Or should you just kind of like, how long can you go before you're like, okay, maybe I should talk to Josh?
So action is the most important thing, is taking the action, providing the notice. Is what's really important. Depending on, I can't fix the way that your contracts necessarily looked, before all of this happened, but depending on how your contract is developed and what it necessarily looks like, whether you're a service business or a retail business or, like a gym or something like that, that's having some of these particular issues, those types of companies that do have signed agreements that exist, like for instance, if we work on an agreement like that, we actually make it where you can make certain modifications like this without getting a new document signed. For the most part, depending on what you're going through, if you're, say, in the service business and you've got these ongoing services that may be subject to a contract, they tend to be either month to month or short range contracts. In that instance, even if they renew, you're able to provide this information, say, hey, this has changed. These are the things that are going on. The real difficulty that some people are running into is when you have a contract that is, it is for a time certain, and there's certain things that are supposed to be happening. And that's when I'm sure everyone, if you've been online for any period of time in the last couple of months, has read about force majeure clauses, which is things we study in law school. And having written quite a few of them in the last decade and some change, and having studied it in law school, I have yet to see one that covered this, which is fascinating to me. I've been writing force majeure clauses, for a long time, and I have yet to even have read one that really works. Even the ones that reference pandemics and talk about these kind of global impacts, what is actually happening right now is really not covered, which means that, in those particular contracts, if you're under a contract to do something, that is an important thing to communicate with an attorney about what your obligations are so that you don't run into, a violation of your contract. We're dealing with a lot of event planners and event coordinators right now. There are a ton of problems going on, because in some instances, as an event coordinator, perhaps you were responsible for performing a service, but you're not the one who actually has control over whether or not the thing happens. So right. What rights do you have, to deal with the contract? And so from an ongoing standpoint, communication of a change in policy or a change in, hey, I know that my contract calls for a weekly in-person meeting, but we're not permitted to have that. We're going to offer it via Zoom. You were still complying with the terms of your agreement and providing what you were supposed to, and providing a notice of how you're changing. So in contract law, we have what's called substantial performance, which says that even though the contract says this, I've substantially performed the way that I'm supposed to. So say I'm supposed to have a weekly in-person meeting with you, but I've provided it via Zoom because we can't be physically in person together, or I personally do not believe that we can have, that we can manage what needs to manage it the best way possible to protect me or my family. Like for instance, I'm a service provider. I'm an asthmatic, which makes me one of those high level people. I have an asthmatic child, and my elderly mother-in-law is currently sheltering in place with us. And so in my house, I have to be even extra careful. And so almost all of my meetings and things have happened online or on the phone as a result of that. But substantially performing, being physically in person isn't necessarily a requirement to substantially perform under the contract. And so that's one of the things you're really looking for. That is a place where a lawyer can help you in kind of interpreting those contracts and helping you navigate that.
So for everyone who is saying, what is force majeure? Can you give us the simplest
mean version?
Yeah.
It is. So force majeure is a statement that you are basically accepted from your obligation to perform under a contract due to acts of God, basically. Typically force majeure is something that's designed for, like, a hurricane came through and destroyed something, or you are actually incapable of performing as a result of something that's happened. And that's been one of the biggest legal issues we faced in the last couple of months is there actually a possibility of performance, or is there a different way to substantially perform?
Ooh, it's the most. It's the most. Because I know that so many people put so much time and energy and money into getting contracts, into putting things in place, into protecting themselves from the things that they can at least try to anticipate. And so that's a lot. So I do, in kind of the vein of people who are adapting or evolving or changing, if I, for instance, or anyone, especially if you're like an artist or a maker, if I put something out that's new, that is helping me kind of stay afloat, and maybe it's a temporary product or service or thing that I'm offering, and I have some branding around it, and I call it something, what are the things that exist, or what should I be doing to protect these names, or this quick logo I put together real quick, or what if the process is really unique, or what I've come up with, what are the ways I can protect myself, or what should I be asking to move forward?
Okay, no, that's a great question. So one of the best things you can do is do it. And we give that advice all the time, because if you do it, you have proof that it's yours. You have proof that you're the one that moved it forward. You have proof that you're the one that communicated it. And so there's a lot of benefit in just doing it and moving forward. There's some other kind of protections that exist. So from a logo standpoint, there's trademark protections that exist. Again, it's from a notice standpoint. If you create something that you believe is a way of showing people that it's the source of your goods or services, that's a trademark. And there are ways that you can kind of grant acknowledgement that is your trademark. You can use the little TM superscript next to what you're using to indicate that it is your trademark. The little R with a circle, that's a more complicated legal process that involves actually registering your mark. So please don't use that if you haven't done that. But the TM or the SM, if it's a service mark, which means you're providing a service and not a good, is something that you can use to kind of provide notice to the marketplace that this is actually something that you consider to be your trademark. From a copyright standpoint, if you're writing things out and you're taking care of, you're actually putting white papers out, or you're writing blog posts or doing videos or something like that, the existence of what you've created is actually protection in and of itself. Those are called common law protections. There are ways to get more protections through registration at the federal level, or even in some cases at the state level. But actually doing them and using them provides you a level of protection in our country that's a very strong thing to benefit you. So again, right now, what I would say as a business owner, as a lawyer who represents business owners, moving quickly and iterating is very important. Having ongoing conversations with your accountants and your lawyers and making sure that you understand what's going on are important. And hopefully you've got a relationship with those service providers where they are able to provide you that advice, and they're able to kind of work with you even in these difficult times. But it is important to keep moving to protect yourself.
I just want to just pause and make sure everyone heard the words, doing it is the best thing you can do. So if you were waiting for a reason to move forward with that idea, what better reason than a lawyer said, do it. Just, move past the fear. Don't worry about the legal stuff. But I mean, and that makes complete sense. The sooner that you show the world that you did it first, really, I guess the further back people can track that this was a thing of yours. But if it's just an idea that you keep to yourself, or you only, so let me ask this question, because now my brain says, or you just email to a friend or text to a friend. What does doing it mean? Do I have to put it out on social media, or could I say, well, I emailed someone and asked about it, on May 1st, so that was my idea? Or is there like a limit to how many people I've exposed to it?
It's not a limit like so many other things in the law, right? That's why lawyers are so well known for saying it depends. But the so the emailing of a friend is a thing that would be beneficial, right? But that's so if you email it to a friend and say, I'm thinking about doing this, what do you think about it, right? That may not necessarily protect you in a way that allows you to say, hey, this is mine and no one else can take it. It might serve as a protection if someone else comes after you and says, hey, that was my idea first. Then you can point to it and say, oh, no, I was actually thinking about this before I was even exposed to your idea. But on the protecting the idea to be first to market, you need to be first to market, because then you're able to say, no, this was my idea. I did this thing and everyone saw it and copied me. And so emailing a friend can help you to prove that you're not copying anyone, but it may not necessarily serve to protect you so that you can stop someone because they may not be copying you if they weren't exposed to your idea, because it is legally possible that two people have the same idea at the same time.
I mean, well, given these very unique restrictions, I would imagine it's happening more often than it ever has, because when everyone is kind of forced into the same skinny little tunnel, it's like, I will do curbside. They're like, duh, all of us are doing curbside. What do you mean? So
Right. And yes. I mean, realistically, that's, nobody owns curbside delivery, right?
right.
Or, and so there are some people who have processes in place that do it better. That is not necessarily a legal benefit, though. Having a good, strong process and way of taking care of things can limit your liability by showing that you do it right and you understand how to do it. But realistically, that's just one of those, that's kind of what sets you apart and makes customers want to come to you, is that you do it better than anybody else.
That's really, really, really good. So I have another question. Again, totally my job. Because again, I keep thinking about people who are not only in a place of already operating or have been doing something to some extent. If I haven't already gone the distance of like putting contracts in place and setting up the legal structure, and I recognize, okay, hey, this is starting to get a little muddy. If I do reach out to, get someone or ask a question, what are the things I should be preparing to take to that conversation? If I'm like, I think I need a contract, or I think I need some kind of help, or maybe someone has said something crazy to me. Well, what should I be prepared with when I have that initial conversation with a lawyer?
So you always want to be prepared with facts, the story. What are you doing? How do you want to do it? How are you going to be paid? The more information you have about what you're trying to do, the more assistance a lawyer can provide for you, because the law relies on facts, because the law is it's facts are applied to the law to understand how an outcome actually works. So for a transactional attorney like myself, who helps with contracts and helps develop template agreements that are going to help your business run, or helps you develop policies or something like that, we need to understand what you are doing. Who are you talking to? What are you trying to sell? How long are these relationships going to last? How much are you going to make on each one of those? There is a very different legal analysis to selling a $5 popsicle than to selling a $5,000 3-month consulting gig. And there's a very different legal analysis to that. You need to understand what you're looking for, because as much as we want to help and provide things, if you come and say, well, I'm going to kind of do some stuff and I'm going to do whatever my customer asks and I'm going to charge whatever they're willing to pay, and there's not a lot we can do, because we have to operate under structure. We can't help you create a contract unless we understand what you're doing. An attorney who knows what's going on, who understands contracts, is going to help guide that and help you answer questions that you may not have realized that you needed to answer, because they understand what's going on. But their job is to help you find the holes and the problems and the places to be concerned and help you shore those up. But an attorney's job isn't to tell you you can't do something because there may be some liability or there's some risk involved in it. They're to show you what that liability and risk is. Because as attorneys who work with small business owners, attorneys are trained to be risk averse. We're trained to see all of the risks that exist, to point them out, to tell you that you shouldn't do that thing because you could get sued, right?
I'm sure that makes you sound like a very negative person.
Right, doesn't it? But entrepreneurs have a special skill set of understanding risk and making a determination, and there's a reward that goes along with that. And so an attorney is such an important kind of piece of your entrepreneurial puzzle, because it does give you a check. It gives you this ability to say, oh wait, this isn't all rosy, right? There's risk for the reward, but it's your job to determine whether or not the risk is worth the reward. And so you want a good, strong relationship with an attorney who's not afraid to tell you the things that you should be concerned about, but also not afraid to kind of help you move forward and solve your problem. Because if you say, no, I think it's worth the risk, then it's the lawyer's job to figure out the best way to protect you while you're taking that risk.
Josh, if I've never said it before, please always tell me the truth. I'd be like, Jackie, this is dumb. Just say it out there. Now, I know a lot of people who have been giving some advice on things that people can do, even as we navigate to the new normal, whatever that looks like. And so a lot of people have been giving the advice of maybe collaborating with other people. And I'm sorry, I'm straying from questions I told you I might ask.
It's okay.
But, as we think about collaborating with other businesses, or as like for me as a service provider, if I decide, hey, let's bundle some services together, normally under, BC, before Corona, this might be a little easier because maybe we're not trying to create a whole company together, but we do have an obligation to our audience now together, whether that's temporary or if it's going to make its way into long term. But what should I be thinking about in those conversations for partnership or collaborations? What should I be thinking about to protect myself and my own things that matter to my business and that kind of thing?
Okay, so yeah, in joint ventures like this, it's a really good idea to have a very strong conversation with who you're working with about obligations, expectations of what will be contributed. If this is something for revenue generation, how are you going to share it? How are you going to determine what it is? It's really easy to say, hey, we'll split everything 50-50, but then you get down to, wait, what is everything? I paid for this and you paid for that, and that wasn't equal. So how do you kind of make those determinations, especially if you're not moving forward with, the creation of an actual company where you're going to work together that runs a little bit separately, where it is this more kind of joint venture collaborative kind of thing, where it becomes really important to think about what's going on. Typically in a relationship like this, it's not unlike a partnership. So the things that you're going to want to think about is, what are the obligations that each party has to bring to it, right? Are they spending money? Are they spending time? Are they responsible for accomplishing a certain goal? The more specific and measurable those particular goals can be, the better, because you have something to point to. It's not, I feel like you didn't work. It is, you did not accomplish this thing that you were supposed to. You were supposed to send 100 emails out and you sent 10. This is something that's measurable that we're able to point to understand what's going on. And then also to think about the way that revenue is going to be divided. If we're bringing money in, who's actually receiving the money in? How is the money supposed to be paid? What are the time frames? If someone pays, do you owe money in 5 days or 10 days? When are you supposed to split that money? Are you creating a new bank account for the sake of actually doing that and splitting the money separately? How are you making sure this works? For the most part, it's really easy in a situation like this to say, well, we just need revenue in because that's going to save both of our businesses.
Right.
But if you get the revenue in and then fight over it, you have some other problems. And so trying to make those decisions early on is probably helpful. And that's one of those places where, and I know I do get paid to say this, so I always hate to say it, but lawyers do become important because we've seen this, right? It's if you're going to work together with somebody else in a joint venture to solve a problem, it may be the first time you've ever collaborated with somebody like that to make money. It's not the first one an attorney's ever seen. That's what you get. We know what's going to go wrong. We cut our teeth on the bad ones, right? Because that's what we see. And so we understand when it goes wrong, and we know how to keep it from going wrong.
So is it advisable then to, and again, I'm thinking because things are happening so quickly and people are trying to just kind of reach out for whatever they can so quickly, should we, like, what becomes the formal thing for us to refer back to? Should we get a contract really quickly, or could this just be like, okay, this is what we talked about. Here's an email that outlines everything we said. Do you agree with this? Does this look good to you? And they respond back, yes. So if I have to show up in court, I'm like, see, they said yes. How far do I have to take that?
So the further you can take it, the better. A written contract is always the best thing that you can get, but writing is what is most important. You want something in writing, whether it is an email or it is a text message or whatever that happens to be. You want to make sure that you have something in place to point back to. What contracts actually do for you is that contracts actually provide you with more information and kind of what happens when things go wrong. So you want to make sure, that you kind of deal with that, because typically if it's just an email agreement, you're going to talk about what you're supposed to do and not what happens if that doesn't happen.
Right.
And so, but getting it in writing is more important than not getting it in writing. And sometimes if speed is what's going on, then don't not speak to an attorney to get a contract together because you think you need to move faster than a lawyer can, because a lot of times we can handle those things and help you navigate that so you can get started while still making sure that you've documented it. Because the reality is those early stages, you don't tend to get in your fights then, right? So there's still time to make sure that we've clarified what your agreement is. That's exactly. And so those things are important, but you do want to make sure that you've clarified those things in writing as strong as you can.
Should we be concerned at all? And I do see a question here on Facebook I'm going to ask in a second. Should we be concerned at all if someone like shies away from, let's say I have this great idea and I'm like, okay, let's, maybe call up Josh, see if he can get us something real quick to just sign and say whatever. And they're like, oh, it doesn't take all of that. Like, I think in the pressure of, I need to move forward, I need to make money, this is a really great idea, but now I've said this out loud to this person, what do I do? They're like, no, I don't really want to do that. Do I go, you should sign a non-disclosure now because I told you my great idea, and you might go do it with someone else? Like, as a business owner who may be in that place, what's the best way to go about that process? If I want to take the idea to someone, do I start with non-disclosures if I feel like this is a really unique, great idea? Or do I just say, okay, well, since we don't want to do this together, if you don't want to go to the lawyer, like I want to, we just won't worry about it, but please don't go do this with anyone else. How do I approach that?
So non-disclosures are a very interesting thing in the startup world, and even in like a situation like this, because we've all got these ideas and we're trying to figure out how to move forward. These kind of non-disclosures and kind of breakdowns of what is your intellectual property that you're sharing. They can be good from a protection standpoint, but they can also be deal killers because sometimes you put an NDA in front of somebody and they just don't want to have that conversation. So typically what we say in situations like this is, have early stage conversations without giving away all of the information, right? The kind of cocktail conversations, as you were, the ones that you would talk about, this idea that you're working on, right? The thing that if somebody took it and tried to figure it out, they're going to have to work harder than you did because it wasn't their idea, right? There's no reason to put anybody under a non-disclosure if that's what you're providing. Non-disclosures become important if you have intellectual property, you have numbers or research or technology that will solve this problem. And in the act of exploring whether or not it's worth kind of coming together, you have to, open the hood and let them see what's inside. That's when non-disclosures start to matter, is when you really start to give away the secret sauce, because you have to explain what's actually going on and what is really what is really behind it, because that's the point at which you are actually disclosing intellectual property that you want to protect. The benefit of a non-disclosure is that it kind of sets this concrete date of, we talked about this thing and I provided this information to them. So if they do it after that date, they don't really have the ability to say, no, that was my idea by myself. And so if you can figure out a way to kind of document these conversations, sometimes you solve that problem without necessarily the non-disclosure anyway.
Yeah, I definitely feel like non-disclosures have become kind of, especially as small business owners, our way of dealing with our own fear of sharing our ideas. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm afraid to say this out loud and put it out in the universe, because then somebody's going to take it, or I'm going to ask someone for some help or some input or some feedback. And they're going to be like, oh, that's a great idea. I could do that better, and run off with it. So it's become more of a fear tactic, or kind of a safety net, I think is the way people normally view it. But I think it's a great point that you point out to say, hey, this is about things that, you absolutely only you have, they're yours. You're exposing people to that. But if they think it's a great idea and they go try to do it, good luck, like, great, good for you. I hope you take as much time as it took me to get to this point to tell you about it. And you just have to be okay with that, I guess.
That's such an important point when it comes to non-disclosures and what actually is, what their purpose is, because I agree with you that I think it, in many cases, is this almost an excuse for the business owner to say, well, somebody may take it, so I'm just not going to share it. I'm going to keep working on it. And one of the most dangerous things you can do with a business idea is to keep it to yourself. You're not protecting it. You're not solving any problems. And going back to what I said earlier, just doing it sometimes is the strongest benefit that you can have. It's a statement I make when I speak to co-starters, and it's, that's the best thing you can do is move forward with your idea, because as much time and energy and thought as went into your idea, nobody's going to be able to catch up, right? And it wasn't their idea in the first place. So what can they do, right? I mean, unless you're talking to some kind of massive powerhouse, who does exactly what you're trying to do, who's going to take it and make their thing better, the act of getting that engine started to take over what you're doing is more energy than most people are willing to put in. I mean, that's true whether you're talking to investors or JV partners. The reality is that nobody wants to expend that energy, right? So that's your thing that you're carrying forward and having conversations about it. Only you start to see what's going on. You get the feedback, you get to see how it works better, and you get to iterate on what's going on. So the best thing you can do is move that forward.
I just want to point out for everyone watching, this is the second time that Josh has encouraged you to just do it. So if you have been looking for a sign to move forward with your ideas or your evolutions, please let us provide these signs for you twice. All right. Let's take a look at our question from Facebook. The question says, if you want to begin a separate but similar business, can you operate within a sole proprietorship you already have? Do the business names or DBAs have to be the same? Do they need to be separate SPs? What's an SP?
Sole proprietorship.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So I'm going to assume that this question is an Alabama-based question.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
in my answer.
Person.
Okay. Because that does matter. So a couple of things. One, as an attorney, I'm a huge fan of sole proprietorships due to the fact that they do not limit your liability. So the answer to your question as framed is it doesn't really matter because you don't really have a lot of protections. It's just you who's going to kind of be subject to whatever particularly happens. In the state of Alabama, DBAs are a thing. There's actually no registration associated with it. So you can have a company or a sole proprietorship, and you can operate under as many names as you necessarily want to without necessarily registering them. That's what trademarks are for. Trademarks actually give you some of that protection, but one company can have multiple ones. Sole proprietorships so there's a single member LLC, which does provide you limited liability. It is, I say this a lot, is the lowest cost, highest yield investment you can make as a business owner because it's hard to mess up. It limits your liability to your business and allows you a lot of opportunities to operate your business while being protected. From a tax standpoint, it's a sole proprietorship. It's what's called a disregarded entity. Your tax filings don't change, but at the state level, you have limited liability and contract power, which is really important. So the one thing that I will say is I would recommend making that step, especially if you're going to run two different types of businesses. Once we've gotten to that step, what I will say is, if you do have that single member LLC and you are looking to operate something that is similar, even if it's not the same, then it's actually technically okay to operate within that same LLC. The big thing is it's about liability exposure. If the liability profile is about the same, I'm offering services, but I was offering social media consulting and now I'm offering COVID-19 consulting or whatever that happens to be, right? It's still consulting. So the liability profile is the same. You're just offering something different. As opposed to if you have a gym and then you decide to open a restaurant, I might recommend having more than one company. If you have a software development company and you decide to launch a product, those are different things with different liability profiles, and you do want to keep them separate to protect each investment as itself, because you have to think about your business ideas as investments. You are investing in this idea to operate in this way, and you are investing in this idea to operate in this way. And so if the ideas are similar, though not necessarily the same, then they can still operate the same way because they're driving toward the same mission. But once the liabilities or the prospective customers start to differentiate themselves, then you may want to consider a separation of liability.
That's a great answer. And Hannelore, I know that was your question. Let us know if you have any follow-up question to that. I know we're a little delayed on the Facebook because it's not in real time. But I do have a question and I want to kind of turn my attention a little bit to people who are in more creative industries that are doing business things, right? So when we talk about sole proprietors, you have a lot of artists and makers and things of that nature who are selling things, but they don't consider themselves often a business, right? So a lot of what we're talking about, even if I'm an artist and I'm doing like a commission, I'm painting custom things and that kind of thing, what kind of protection do I need as an artist or as a maker who is basically doing business transactions, but I haven't set up any type of haven't gone to become Jackie the Artist LLC. What should I be thinking about, especially now, because I don't want people, short me on my money. So what should I be thinking about as an artist or a maker or anyone who is in that creative space?
Absolutely. So the primary thing to think about is going back to what I was just saying, is whether or not you actually need a legal entity to limit the liability of what you're operating in. And an artist is such an interesting kind of industry, maybe the wrong word, but it is an interesting profile of entrepreneur who are doing things and they're making things. And the question becomes, is there a liability outside of whether or not you're going to lose money on the commissioned work that you did? And so that's a deep consideration that you have. A few things that you're kind of looking at are how could you potentially get in trouble for what you're doing? And is that something that you need to separate from yourself personally? So if you're painting something, a commissioned work, one of the biggest dangers that you may run into is, someone accuses you of plagiarizing someone else's work, right? A violation of copyright. In that instance, for the most part, that's going to be on you because you're the one that actually did the art. So even an entity is not even going to protect you from that, right? Even as an attorney, malpractice obviously is a danger, right? If I give you bad advice, it's on me. But there's two other attorneys in my office that if they give you bad advice, it's on them. Now, as a managing partner, I pay for the insurance for that. That's what that's for. But at the same time, that's a personal liability. But as a law firm, I have staff, I have an office where people come. So there are other potential liabilities that exist for me, a service provider, that creates a benefit of that limited liability entity. So as an artist, if you were in a place where you go out and you rent studio space from someone else, especially if your customers come into your studio space, you have potential liabilities that are separate and apart from you that do benefit you from actually separating that. Those liabilities can be from the contract of the lease itself to the premises liability problems of having someone show up in your space because you don't want somebody going after your house because they slipped in your work space, right. Where your studio that you actually have. So those are the considerations that you want to make as a business owner who's planning something. If you're just doing art in your house, and then you're going and you're selling it, somewhere, and there's no actual, you don't have a space that you're dealing with, and people aren't necessarily coming to see you, then you may not necessarily need that limited liability protection. And if you've ever heard what we talk about the 3 pillars of a firm foundation. Those are your foundational protections that you're looking for. But in any business endeavor, you're always looking at the external protections, which are what you deal with a customer themselves, right? So as an artist, if you're selling something, are all sales final? Are all sales as is? If it's a commissioned work, what are the obligation? Are you going to hold it until they actually pay you? What are the intellectual property rights that you are conveying, by providing something? If you're painting a physical work, or you are doing a physical, some physical art of some variety, you're basically selling that thing, right? If it's digital, there are a lot of other kind of rights and things that go into it. And then there's also the consideration on the internal pillar, which is everything necessary to kind of get your product to the market, right? So if you're using someone who's helping you design something, or someone who does a part of your art for you that you're unable to do, you need to make sure contractually that you own their work so that you can sell it in the right way. And so even as an artist, there's still a kind of legal, a legal analysis of what protections you actually need in your business. It's easy for me to say the first thing to do is form an LLC, but sometimes that's not the biggest protection that you need. So there is a lot to consider as you kind of move forward in that.
And just so everyone knows, if you have questions, this is the time to ask them, because we are about 12 or so minutes away from ending, and I try to end on time. So just putting that out there. But as you talked about a little bit about, makers and artists and people who are operating in their homes, I do have a question, because of course, here in Alabama, we've had quite a few things where people who offer services like hair or makeup or nails or those types of services, those types of businesses who were under a restriction and now are really not under as much restriction. Do you feel like that there needs to be, I won't actually go into the part about what they were doing before the governor made this last change. I'm going to stick with today and ask, since there are, new things to be worried about, there are new risks involved, health risks. Would you advise, or what thoughts should we have around people who own a business where they have to touch people or be in very close proximity? What should they be thinking about? Should they introduce some type of new, hey, if you contract corona, you won't sue us because you decided to come, even though we think that makes normal sense, but just in case. Are there any things that they should be thinking about as service providers who are actually putting their hands on people to consider right now?
Yes, I mean, and those are probably, when you're putting your hands on people, something really serious to consider to protect yourself. But I think at this point, as we're reopening, and all of the rules, and people are starting to come in, and some people are afraid, some people aren't afraid. There's a lot of kind of differences of opinions. As a business owner, what we need to be doing to protect ourselves is making sure that we're laying the policies out for our staff. What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to do it? That we're laying out those policies for the customers and the clients. How are you supposed to operate when you come in? You don't just get to get your hair done, right? If you come to Jackie to get your hair done, right, you have to follow the rules that are set, right? Do you sit in the parking lot, wait till I text you so that you can come in because my waiting room is closed? Are you required to sanitize your hands when you come in and wear a mask? And these are the things we will be doing to protect you. And do you post some kind of notice that says, hey, this is at your own risk, you were choosing to come, these are the policies that we're following and what's happening? And so if you do choose to come, this is what it looks like. I will tell you, in our office, those are actually some policies that we're working on, that we're hoping to get up on the website this week, so that we're able to provide those for business owners who are getting started, so you at least have a template to start from and work with. We have the employee policy. So if your employees choose to come back to work, ways to protect them. We're also working on the customer policies and what actually goes on for those. But it is important to be thinking about those policies. Again, that goes back to what we were talking about early on. about notice and making sure that, you provide notice of what you're doing, and how you're doing it. How are you protecting them? How are you following the order? Make sure that you've paid attention to it. If you were unsure of what the order says or what you should be doing, that's when you talk to lawyers, because we read these things and we know what they mean, right? But the biggest thing you can do is communicate how you're doing it and make sure that you've put something in place to protect your customers and your employees, from the dangers of reopening.
Yeah, it's a mess. Every time, just hearing you talk about, and really it sounds like, in a simplified way, it's like, hey, whatever you're going to do, one, do it, be clear about it, say it out loud, get it out there for people to see. And if you're concerned, of course, you can go to the legal part of it. But I think things like policies and having a template for that, even during this time, are good for, you need policies anyway. So there's that. So if you don't have policies, maybe this is a great time to introduce one, even if it's under the current circumstances. But hopefully, as time goes on and we have our new normal, people can adapt some of the things that they felt like, they see the value in right now, which is my bridge to a question about the value of legal assistance and support in general. Because, as business owners, as people who are like solopreneurs or are working just with one person, a lot of times we feel like, oh, I don't need a lawyer right now because it's just me. And, I'm just doing my little thing until something goes wrong. It's all good until it's not, Josh. So I wonder what advice you have for whether people are brand new to what they're doing or they've been in it for a while, but maybe they have a very small group of people. They don't have employees, they have independent contractors, people who are pretty much solo for the most part. What advice do you have about how they value getting legal counsel and how they go about doing that?
I'm happy to answer that because that's actually the vision for which I started my firm. I started as a solopreneur 12 years ago. I started this firm with the idea that the small business, the solopreneurs, the bootstrapped entrepreneurs were underserved. As we've grown over the last 12 years, we've also learned that there's also a pretty hefty portion of the middle market that is underserved, who think that they're supposed to go to big law firms who provide kind of some service and don't help you actually navigate what's going on. Legal impacts every decision you make as a business owner. I think that's why they keep bringing me back to co-starters, because I say that and it's supposed to scare everybody.
Yes, your job is 100% to scare co-starters,
right?
in case no one's ever
scare everybody to death. I don't believe so. As important as I do think it is to scare people, sometimes if you scare someone too hard, it scares them into inaction. And so what we do at Gatehouse, focusing on the education first approach to legal advice and services, is to make sure you understand what's going on, to make sure you understand how legal impacts your business and how to make those decisions. It's easy as a lawyer for us to say, here's all of the problems that exist and you can't do anything about it. The reality is, all of those problems do exist, and there's probably an order in which you can move forward to protect yourself, because you're building a business and your protections can be built alongside it, right? You have to make sure that your foundation is built right. You've got to make sure that you lay the foundation out ahead of the walls, but at the same time, as long as you're building that foundation so that as you expand, you are expanding on a strong foundation, you're going to be okay. And so we do a lot of work at Gatehouse to help make sure that we want business owners to view legal as a partner in this, is to understand that, legal is designed, it should be approachable. It should be accessible, and it should be predictable, right? As business owners, all of those things are absolutely essential to what's going on. So what I will say is, you need to have an advisor that you can trust, an advisor who understands what's going on, not one who just says, no, you can't do that, that's crazy, or not one who says, I think you're insane. Because the reality is, there are a lot of people who've had a lot of crazy ideas who've been very successful, who were told no so many times. And that's scary. But when you have an idea, when you have the guts to move forward and kind of move on that, you need an advisor who's going to help you solve those problems. And the value of legal is having someone on your team that helps you solve that problem and make sure that it works. It is essential from day one. In co-starters, and it's one of those things I've always hesitated to say, but it has become something I say every time I'm there, is that you need to have access to legal information that you can trust, right? LegalZoom is not necessarily that legal information. It is one of the reasons that we do things like this, where we come to co-starters, where we go to Forge. It's the reason we have this education first approach, because we believe it's important, because you need to have that access. And you want to have someone that you can trust, who knows on your side, who's not just trying to run a bill on you.
Right.
Who, if they ask, how's your business going? It's not to keep the time running. It's because they're actually concerned about it. And you want to be looking for that and make sure it's there, because you're going to be making a lot of decisions in your business. And you want to know that those decisions are really, they're safe ones, right? Or at least, if they're not safe ones, that you knew the risks that you were taking,
Right.
and were willing to take those risks. And whether it's us, one of us lawyers at Gatehouse, or it's someone else, you just want someone that you can absolutely trust, because legal impacts you. One of the things I would encourage you as you're looking at lawyers and talking to lawyers is you want someone who understands small businesses because they've worked with them, who has some level of experience in hiring people and working with partners, who just gets those things and understands what you're going through. And also someone who's willing to hold your hand and guide you through that. Because realistically, as a small business owner, you're going to get to a place where you can't necessarily always call before you have to make a decision. And so you want an attorney who's going to counsel you and help you learn how to make those decisions, so that you make decisions in the right way. And also one that helps you understand when you should pause before you make that decision to ask for help.
Legal is just so scary, Josh. It just feels like such a big commitment to even think about the legal structure of anything. And I know that that's kind of, what you all are having to combat all the time, is just the fear of, well, if I talk to a lawyer, are they going to charge me too much? Are they going to tell me the right thing? Can I even afford that? Which is usually the question I think all of us have to ask is, do I even have the money for a lawyer? But that's one thing I have always appreciated about you all's approach with small businesses, is like, hey, so you can't pay $5,000 a month to keep a lawyer on retainer. We get it. So we have some other options for you. And I do recommend that all of you check into that. But I do have one last question. I don't see any questions on Facebook, so I'm just going to ask my last question here. And this is something that you may or may not have a clue about, but I did want to ask because I feel like it will come up, or someone will say, you should have asked this. As a lot of business owners we're seeing all this money flow, right? People are signing up for dollars all over the place. And we are, and I say we because as small business owners, we've got to stick together even when it's tough. And a lot of people are signing a lot of loan terms, a lot of what should we be, and there are a lot of grants out there. There's just a lot of stuff that's being offered. Are there any things that we should be looking at that present themselves as red flags, or things that should make us slow down and ask for assistance or help, or anything we should know?
One of the big things that I'll say is that there's a lot of actual government things that are being offered through the SBA and otherwise. And though there are concerns and questions and things that are going on, with regard to all of those, one of the things you want to pay attention to is making sure that the help that you're looking for, the options that you have, that they are legitimate. Because there are people around who are not afraid to prey on the small business and to kind of offer things that look like something that are not. We actually, that's one of the biggest education pieces we have for new business owners is if you apply for a trademark, one of the first things that you get about 6 weeks after you apply for it is this thing that looks really real that tells you to spend like $3,700 to register it in some fancy book. And the number of people who just send us and go, hey, is this real? Am I supposed to pay it? I had no idea this was a cost. And we're like, no, that's a scam. Don't pay for that, even though it looks real. There's a lot of people who are preying on small business owners. And I haven't seen any right now that I can speak to necessarily, but I would be, if it is not coming from a real bank, if the SBA's name is, is not associated with it, it might be something worth at least asking someone if it's as real as it looks. works, because if a deal is too good to be true, it probably is. And so you should always have some level of kind of skepticism of those particular things, and make sure that you are considering the source of what's actually going on. Because realize that making a bad decision is a really big thing right now. And so if you are seeking money, if you're seeking funds, I would seek advice on that. Whether it's the PPP, on how do you repay it and what does that look like, and how do we make sure it turns into a grant? Advice can go a long way to making sure that you're protected moving forward.
Yeah. Okay, well, we have one last question that I don't think will take you very long to answer. So before I ask that question, which this is always great to end with this person's questions because they're always the best. First, tell us how people can contact Gatehouse Law.
Okay, our number is 205-208-9595. You can give us a call. You can ask for any one of us lawyers by name, or otherwise Caitlin would be happy to direct you in the right place. You can also email us at info@gatehouse.law. I will say we are gatehouse.law, which it sometimes gets us in trouble, but info@gatehouse.law. And then there are a few other things that we're hoping to get up on the website soon at gatehouse.law to provide additional information. And otherwise, ask somebody at Create or Forge or any or Rev, and they could probably help you figure out how to get in touch with us.
Because you're our favorite lawyer in these Birmingham streets. So this last question, which is great, is why is Josh wearing a jacket when we all know he hasn't taken off his sweatpants for 2 months?
Well, I determined that it was necessary to finally use my iron. I just needed to make sure it worked. I thought it was a good excuse to act like I was still working. I will say that we tried for the first month or so to enforce dress code for video calls at the staff. It did not work. I managed it a lot longer than the rest of the staff did. And then it just all kind of went downhill from there, right? I thought at least looking like I'm an attorney may help or something, right? I'm supposed to.
No, that's really helpful. It's really helpful.
And I haven't had an excuse to wear my jacket in a while.
Well, see,
and I like this
and my answer would have been, I just need to make sure my clothes still fit, because the problem with wearing sweatpants all the time is that you go to put on something that doesn't give, and you're like, oh, well, all right. All right, well, we're going to end here. Thank you so much for your time, Josh. We always appreciate your knowledge and expertise and just being so candid with us and giving us the real. I do encourage, again, everyone who is watching, do reach out to Gatehouse Law. They're the easiest people to talk to. Thank you. A lot of people in the chat are saying thank you here on Zoom. I know that everyone is grateful for this insight. And as soon as we can, we'll get this up for replay and people can watch it and share it if others have missed it. Any last thoughts before we go?
The biggest thing that I think I can say right now is, and this will be the third time I've said it, is move forward. Whether you were thinking about starting a business, or you were in a business, or you were starting, when all of this started, move forward. These are interesting times. I actually started my law firm in 2008. And so this feels very much like that time. There are a lot of amazing companies, both locally and outside of Alabama, that started in that time. And I imagine that when we look back on this 10 years from now, we're going to see the same thing. So be one of those people. If you've got an idea you think is going to change the world, move forward and create and do something special, because that's what we do, right? This is a great opportunity for us as entrepreneurs to come up with something new and different.
Do it. You heard it here first. Go forward and then ask legal questions later. Thank you again. You have a wonderful rest of your day, and goodbye. And thank you to everyone who has joined us. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.